This is the Unshakable Self, the podcast where we explore what it means to live boldly, authentically, and unshakable in your power. I'm Seryna Myers, a sacred soul strategist who's here to help you step into the fullest expression of who you are, no matter where you are or who's watching. This podcast is your spark to think bigger, dig deeper, and take one unapologetic step closer to living your truth. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Hey friend, now, because of the nature of podcasting and how things are recorded in advance, in some ways, this episode is going to be, considered a little late. However, given that the things that we're talking about are going to be at least the next 4 years, and possibly longer for those of us in Canada who are just like a smidge behind with our own election, I figured, hey, better late than never. Now, this is a conversation about anger. And I do want to speak specifically about what's happening politically in the US right now, because even though I'm not American, it impacts all of us. And with us being so close to the American border, Canadians, we like to borrow a lot of American traits. We say we don't. Our whole identity is how we're not American, and yet somehow these ideologies creep their way across the border and pollute us. They really shift the way that we are interacting with each other, the way that we are viewing the world, and it fucking sucks. Anyways, when I wrote my book, Sacred Anger, I wrote it during Trump's first presidential term. I wrote it specifically, I was hoping to actually get it done in time for the election where Joe Biden ended up getting in, because people were still very afraid that we were going to have another round of Trump. And then, of course, we saw everything that happened when Trump didn't win and pretended that he'd lost the election because of corruption and whatever, and all of that. And so it was a very angry time. We also had all of that kind of tension happening with the pressure of being bottled up with COVID and people being in their homes and resisting the mask mandates. We also had the Black Lives Matter movement come up really loud. There was a fucking lot going on in the world, and a lot of it got channeled into this book. And this was definitely not a book about, hey, this is how you manage your anger. Everything that I saw in my research was about how we manage our anger. And I think especially as women, there was this rejection of this emotion because it wasn't nice, it wasn't polite, it wasn't good. And then you had spiritual folks who were so uncomfortable with the shadowness and the darkness of their anger that they would bypass it altogether. And I did that a lot in the beginning. I was told by my teachers that my anger was the ego and that it was, something that needed to be abolished. And what I learned through my own reclamation work and my healing, and honestly, conversations with my own guides rather than through human teachers, was that anger was a teacher. Anger was a tool. It was a messenger. It was something that we can learn from. And our souls chose to be humans at this time, despite the global fuckery going on. We chose it to learn lessons. And so if we are trying to pretend that those emotions don't exist, that we are somehow, superior humans who are love and light all day fucking long, and we're just going to kumbaya into higher states of vibration, and that is just the way that we exist, well, then we are actually missing the point. Our souls chose to be humans in this era to experience the very things that we are experiencing, and also to create the change that needs to happen in the world. When Trump came in the first time, I really felt like it was a detox. And honestly, as much as the Biden administration didn't do what a lot of us needed and wanted, I also feel like if we'd had 8 back-to-back years of Trump, we would not have been able to catch our breath. So here we are in round 2, older, wiser, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how much we learned. But there is still this shift that needs to happen. It's like this gross purge of all the shit that Trump didn't create. Let's be honest. This hatred, this malignant grossness that has been, safe to express under his regime, that was there. He didn't create it. He just gave people permission to say it out loud, which is super fucked. But that's a conversation for another day. When we are spiritual people who are sitting in the discomfort of this existing world, of what the next 4 years are going to look like or longer, God forbid, we have to be willing to lean into the discomfort and roll up our sleeves and get shit done. Because this purge has to happen for us to be able to truly be in the state of, any kind of love and acceptance and tolerance for everybody. We needed to, oh God, the visual I'm getting is like a really gross pustulous thing being popped and purged. Like, it's gross. And my guides sometimes are a little bit uncomfortably visual, but that is exactly what's happening. We needed to get this stuff out from the shadows. We needed to get it out from the dark corners so that we could clear the air and actually live in a harmonious state rather than in a state that we all pretend is harmonious. And then we have this hate that's brewing underneath. Canadians are on paper very nice people. And we kind of had this distorted utopia, particularly white Canadians, that like racism wasn't a big deal here and blah, blah, blah. And when we were hearing all the things that were happening across the border, it was very much oh, well, that's not happening here. But then the conversation started to happen and everyone's eyes started to open and we were like, oh, we are very fucking wrong. And so I feel like, pre-pandemic, Canada was exactly what I just described. It was this, on paper, this harmonious state, but actually there was this really dark underbelly of racism and ableism and sexism and misogyny and all these things. And it was happening for us politically, but it was also happening in our homes and in our workplaces. And it was not as overt as what we were seeing across the border, but that almost made it more insidious because it was sneaky hatred, sneaky anger, sneaky malignant grossness underneath the surface. And, while I appreciate being in a more honest state, I'd like us to be in an honest state that is also really accepting. And we've got some fucking work to do. Which brings us back to anger. Anger can be an incredible tool for doing the work, for getting things done. It's a wonderful motivator. It's also a wonderful provider of clarity. When you are going through something really big, the extra noise, the little fiddly day-to-day stuff that seems really like a big deal in the moment, suddenly that gets crystal clear. And we'll see that with like medical crises. We'll see that with grief and loss. We'll see that with any kind of major life event. And anger can do that for us. It can also just like kind of hone us in on what our priorities actually are and what truly matters for us. The interesting thing about Trump 1 versus Trump 2 for me personally, I went through Trump 1 as an ally. I had not fully recognized my own queerness. I used to joke that I was mostly straight, but I didn't really recognize just how not mostly I was. My wife didn't realize she was trans, so I was in what I thought was a hetero relationship, and I had gay and lesbian friends. I knew trans people, but it's a lot easier to be an ally than to be directly impacted when things like this happen. I am ashamed to say when Trump 1 happened, I genuinely thought that there was like a bit of hype and that it wasn't going to be as bad as everybody thought. I hate to say that. I apologized to some people that I talked to at the time because we had just gone through a Harper government and he was no Trump, but he was pretty fucking bad. And I was like, you guys, you know what? We just made it. Like, it's okay. It's going to be all right. Like, it's only 4 years. Don't worry. And then it was like 4 really fucking shitty years. And then we threw a pandemic on top of that, right? So again, if you were one of those people who I didn't actually directly apologize to, you were not overreacting and like, fuck, was I wrong? I'm so sorry. And so now in this era of Trump too. And again, I'm Canadian. However, I do travel to the US a lot, several times a year. I have a lot of friends across the border, some of which are people of color, some of which are gay and lesbian and trans. And like, I'm worried. I'm trying not to give into the fear, but I'm worried. I'm concerned for them. And I'm concerned for what it can mean for us with our upcoming election. My wife isn't just trans, she's also an immigrant. And so even though she has her citizenship, when we see the kinds of things that are happening across the border, it's easy to go like, oh yeah, no, but that's not here, until you realize that it absolutely can be if we don't make change, if we don't get out and vote. And this is why using your anger as a motivator is so important. Now, I say that, and I also recognize that 4 years of being permanently pissed off is a lot. And we as humans have a finite amount of energy and hours in a day. So we need to be really mindful and strategic about how we want to lean into our anger to be able to make positive change. We cannot go hard all day, every day for 4 years, because we will burn out long before the time runs out. And they are relying on that. They are adding a lot of fuel to the fire right from day one, literally to get us to burn out and shut up faster. And we can't let that happen. Now, when it comes to global events like this, it's tricky to really see the anger entirely for what it is, because sometimes our anger is because we're angry. And if we look at the injustices that were presented in that very, very first day of inauguration, there is more than enough to be upset about and angry about there. But oftentimes, and I talk about this in the book, anger is a mask for other things. I did a Facebook post recently about losing my shit in an IKEA parking lot. And what I realized is that it was just me being overwhelmed from being stimulated a lot in IKEA, between the people and the lights and the sounds and the friggin' intercom going and all of that kind of stuff. I am undiagnosed neurodivergent spiciness of some kind. I'm assuming it's ADHD. I have CPTSD. I'm very easily stimulated, and it easily will shift quickly into first anxiety and then anger. Now, if you imagine the kind of overstimulation we are having as a population right now, just with the news cycle, let alone everything else that we're inundated with all day and all night, it's a lot. And so we have the legitimate, purposeful anger that is based on the things that have been presented into the world. And then we have just our own need for regulation. And if you head over to my YouTube channel, there's actually an interview that I did with Harmesh Kaur, and it's wonderful. It was from maybe a year or two ago, and it was not on the podcast. And we talk in that about, nervous system regulation and the need for that balance. Because the more that we can do that, not just being in the body, but regulating the body, the more we can handle our situations as they're coming, as opposed to being driven by our past stress, our past responses. We can't really let our trauma make all the decisions for us. And the body responds in that way because it's been conditioned to, right? It was a protective mechanism and it did its job at the time. But what we need to do is be as regulated as we can so that we're facing things as we experience them, not based on all the past events and not based on the fear that we have about what could happen in the future. Fear is one of the things that will also use anger as a mask, because anger is, for many of us, a lot more comfortable of an emotion to feel than the vulnerability of fear. And there is also a lot to be afraid of, especially if you're Black, Brown, Indigenous, especially if you're gay, or if you are trans. There is some legitimate shit to be afraid of. And again, we can't let the fear be in the driver's seat. We can let it talk to us and inform us and give us ideas on what is actually urgent, which is part of why we need to have that regulated nervous system in the first place, so that we can truly hear urgency and decipher what is something that needs to be immediately acted on and what is something that needs a plan, so that we can strategize for the future. And In the case of fear, it is actually sometimes, especially in conditions like this, to actually let anger be the mask. Because in those moments, we almost need the fire of anger to override the fear. Because it is very easy to swing into a freeze state when we are tired, overwhelmed, burnt out, and afraid. And so if we can use anger to be the thing that steps into the front, to get to be the shield, to get to be the protector, if we're able to access it in that way, oftentimes if fear has been the one that's been in the driver's seat, that will be a reprieve that is actually really kind and available to you. Now, in the book, I actually have an entire chapter that is just different spiritual tools for what to do to move your anger. And depending on where you are on your journey, if you have been somebody who has typically tried to be entirely high vibe, that's probably the place that you want to start from. And I am begging you not to. Sounds counterintuitive, but I feel shitty. I'm angry. I'm furious. I don't know how to regulate. I don't know how to calm down. Why would I not just immediately jump to getting rid of this? And that is because what you resist persists. And if you avoid this, if you try to bury it and push it down, and I mean, I get into that more in specific in the book, but if you do that, it is still there. It is still waiting for you. Just because it has been cast out doesn't mean that it is gone. And the worst part of that is it means that you are probably not in control of when it's going to get dealt with. It's going to spring up and express itself as it feels like it's time, whether that's on your schedule, whether that's an opportune moment or not. And this is why anger is such an important conversation when we're talking about the unshakable self, because the unshakable self is someone who is so anchored and rooted in who they are that they are not afraid of what they feel, where they can express it, where they can honor it. And I shouldn't say not afraid, because honestly, sometimes my anger still scares me. I have been through some dark ass shit. And when I go into those places of survival, I have felt honestly hungover on the other side of it on occasion, because it is so hot and so intense. And if it burns for a long time, it's fucking exhausting. But I still do it. You can be afraid and lean into it anyway. And so this is why I talk about the idea that anger needs a strategy. So we need to identify, first of all, what it is that we're feeling. And we want to identify, yes, I'm feeling angry, but also remember how I said it's sometimes a mask for other things. We want to actually do that work of saying, I'm angry and I'm afraid and I'm feeling powerless and I'm feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated or whatever it is. But we just really want to know the truth of where we're at. And this is something that might be a little bit trickier the first couple of times that you actually sit down and acknowledge this process, because we haven't actually allowed ourselves to just be in our emotions, and we certainly haven't been taught to do this. But the more you tune in, the more you allow your body, your emotions to speak to you, the easier this is going to get, and also the easier they are to decode, because you're familiar with what like your general levels are like. So once you've identified what emotions are at play, anger and then some, then you just acknowledge it. You don't resist it. You don't push it down. You don't shame yourself for feeling it. You're just like, yeah, we are fucking in it. Okay. And there is like a degree of permission here. And we're not going to have like maybe the full emotional experience of it yet. That gets into the next step. But the acknowledgement is just saying, yep, this is happening. It's fucking go time. And then allowing it instead of that constriction that if I just will it away, if I just breathe hard enough, it'll dissipate. It might physically dissipate, but it's still waiting there, waiting to be resolved later. As I have said before, feel it in the moment if and when you can. And so now here we are, we have identified what we're feeling. We've said, yep, we're fucking doing this. Let's go. Now you're actually going to feel it. You're going to let it be ugly and heavy and hard and gross. You're going to scream into a pillow if you need to. You're going to like karate kick and wildly flail your limbs into the air. You're going to shake your whole body and just like give the energy somewhere to go and just say the things, do the things, write them out, burn them, whatever it is, just feel the ugliness of that emotion. And with the feeling comes the moving. It is a lot easier to move an emotion that has been expressed than it is to try to move something that has been repressed. So after you've felt it, then you can start to lean into all those tools and strategies you have to move them. Move the anger. Maybe that's breath work. Maybe that's tapping. Maybe that's meditation. Maybe it's sitting with crystals. Maybe it's prayer and working with certain angels. Like I said, there's an entire chapter of spiritual tools that you can use. Maybe it's calling a friend, journaling, whatever your tool is, whatever your preferences are. And it's good to have a collection of them, because there are going to be days where like your tried and true, the one thing you always do just doesn't work anymore. And you need to have another tool that you can lean on. And then once you get to that place, once you've actually done the work of moving the energy, then you can sit back and go, okay, what was the lesson here? What was that trying to teach me? Where did I feel this before? What do I need to know so I have a plan that I never end up in this place again? Or that if I do end up in this place, I know what to do so that I can navigate it with greater peace or with, greater confidence. The goal has never been don't feel angry. The goal has been feel whatever you're feeling. Let it be honest and true, no matter how quote unquote ugly it is. If you can look at those emotions with neutrality instead of judgment, all the better. But like, hey, baby steps, right, friends? It's about feeling it and then learning from it, listening to it, growing on the other side. But you can't grow, you can't learn from it until you've actually allowed yourself to experience it. And this is honestly where a lot of spiritual people get it wrong, myself included in the early days. I was so judgmental about my negative emotions, in particular because I really associated them with my past and my family and the way that I grew up. We were a very volatile household, and I judged myself when I would feel that emotion. I didn't have any healthy tools for it. And so it was very much, what can I do? What can I do to get rid of this shitty feeling and get back to my quote unquote like high vibe self? And I did so much harm to myself because that part of me that was so fucking raw, the last thing it needed was to be rejected and cast out. It needed a hug. It needed someone to be like, I'm here to hold space for your rage. Fucking let me have it. And I couldn't even be that person for myself. I know that I'm not the only one. So spiritual people, what we do is we go, oof, okay, I've got these tools. I'm going to work the tools and then I'm going to get back to the light. Okay, I'm just going to meditate. I'm just going to chant, and I'm just going to open up to spirit, or I'm going to pull some cards and I'm going to ask spirit, okay, what did I need to know about that situation? But like, we're intellectualizing a physical and emotional and psychological experience. You can't think your way out of your feelings. If you could, every time someone was about to have a panic attack, you'd be like, hey, you're having a panic attack. This is a panic attack. This isn't real. Calm down. And they'd go, oh yeah, you're right. And panic would go off. We don't work that way. We need to feel our feelings. And then we can learn from them. Then we can listen to them. Then we can ask for the guidance. But we have to actually allow ourselves to feel it first. And if you're someone who has been really cognitively like pursuing higher vibrational states, it is going to be really uncomfortable for you to do that. And I'm asking you, I'm begging you to please do it anyway. In earlier seasons of this show, there is an episode on sacred anger that we'll talk about this more. There was an episode that was talking about something like your discomfort could save the world. We need to be willing, especially in this place. And now, not to take any kind of sides here, but when we are looking at this far right extremist thinking that is coming into the world, and we are wishing they could just have some tolerance, have some compassion, some empathy, that they could open their minds and their hearts in the ways that we see ourselves doing. We are, in essence, asking them to lean into the discomfort, to challenge their beliefs, to do things differently. And if we are wanting, desiring, expecting that of the other side, we need to be willing to do it ourselves. And I'm not talking about buying into their propaganda, but I'm talking about calling ourselves out on our shit. Because there are ways that we ignore, that we bypass, that we dismiss. Because it fractures the way we see ourselves. It creates an incongruence of who we think we are and how we're navigating the world. And then we start to get really careful and we start to curate and we start to make sure that like our public perception is how we want to be perceived instead of it being the truth of who we are. On a superficial level, like the number of times that I have put on under eye concealer because I'm so self-conscious of my under eyes, because I have very, very dark under eyes. It looks like I've been punched in the face every day of my life. The number of times I was so ashamed to get a really important download that I would have received into the world. And I would stop and I would actually not do a full face of makeup, but I always put on under eye concealer because I didn't want anyone to perceive me as whatever. I don't even know what the story was that I created, but I was curating how I would be received. And to be honest, when I think about just where I was on my journey in the early days of the podcast in season 1 and to a degree season 2 as well, I really wanted to put this like spiritual truth bomb slinger right at the forefront. And I was that, but I also was working through a lot of dark stuff in therapy. I was working through like the shifts and changes in my marriage. I was working through even like my own self-expression within my marriage, within, frankly, like the constraints that were created from the duality of the two sides of the masking and unmasking crowds. I felt so caught in the middle with that. It was a whole thing. And so I found myself withering and shrinking and being quiet. And that was why this had to be the show. This was calling me out on my bullshit. This was saying, hey, this is more or less what you have been teaching and preaching for like a decade. So it's time to walk the walk, bitch. Here we are. And do I get it right 100% of the time? No. But I do my best. I do my best to live my life with as little incongruence between who I am, what my values are, and what I do in the world. And that's what I encourage you to do, because that, my friend, is where liberation lies. So I will make sure that I link those episodes in the show notes along with that interview with Harmesh around nervous system regulation. I'll also make sure that the link to Sacred Anger is in the show notes because it's a beautiful book. And actually, I think it's due for a little bit of a re-release as I fine-tune some things. I've learned a lot since I published it, but it is also very good as it is right now. So I'm going to make sure the link for that is in the show notes. And of course, I am so open to having a dialogue about this. So if you're hearing it and it's bringing things up for you, your thoughts, your feelings, whatever, please feel free to send me an email or reach out to me on social media. Again, links are all in the show notes. And that is it for our episode today. Hey, beautiful. Are you ready to start living unshakably? Yes, of course you are. Download my free Unshakable Self Starter Kit. It is a quick and powerful way to reconnect with your truth. The link is in the show notes, so hit pause and go grab it now.